Thursday, my favorite day of the week, January 14th. 14 days into 2021.
I can't believe that.
Loy, what are we doing with 2021?
Well, we looked at Tom Lars, dog. Tom left something in the car, but he's coming in the door.
Thank you.
Well,
don't forget.
It's chilly, what, 30 degrees, 32, 3 degrees. Tom, good morning
Good
again.
morning, sir.
Again,
Yes.
Tom's looking good and feeling much better.
Oh yeah,
Getting back
better
in
every day.
that, you're coming along there. And you're carrying less weight? That's really something.
Quite a bit less weight.
Yeah,
Still losing.
congratulations. Well, congratulations,
So-
and that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Is it true, and maybe you know this answer by now, that with each pound that you gain, that your heart has to pump approximately a mile for the new veins that were created in that pound of fat?
That is true.
I've heard that for years, and
Yes.
I guess so. If you gain a pound, your heart's got to pump another mile. So, just keep that in mind for people who are thinking about dieting or want to diet or whatever, is that your heart has to pump a lot. I was flipping channels the other day, and I ran across this thing, and I thought, what is that? It said 500-pound twins or something. Now, I know that you probably hadn't seen that, Tom, but I thought, what is that 500-pound twin what? And it was twins like humans.
Yeah.
Twin sisters, I think it was. Well, I know it was. And they were 500 pounds plus a piece. And
Half a ton.
And you just think about that, and that first thing I thought about was their heart.
Yep.
How can that heart sustain the pumping and all of that, having to maneuver the blood through all of those veins and so forth, and it's just the human body is amazing, I guess, when you think about it. So,
There's no man-made pump like one human heart.
oh my goodness, and how in the world that thing just keeps on.
For an average of 80-something years.
I was reading something yesterday. But when I look at some of the stuff in history, that we bring up every now and then, there was one little tidbit, and I didn't even write it down, but I thought it was hilarious because something about these scientists or doctors, whatever, in Texas back in the 90s had introduced or found some sort of enzyme that slows down the aging and the dying process, and it went on to say that both of the guys that had come up with it are dead. So I don't know how well the thing worked. It must not have worked too well on them. But you can't fool with Mother Nature much. You hope that you can stay healthy and move along, but you just never know.
How do you take into account things like lightning?
Of course.
Or COVID,
Mm-hmm.
because COVID is something that we are learning to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
and just accidents.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, automobile accidents happen, various kinds, and every now and then you'll see a young person and they passed away due to an auto accident, or
Yeah.
not even a young person, but so lots of different things happen. And I know that this is kind of an odd thought, but when you study history, certain things control or help to control population. And I mean worldwide population.
that is true.
And there are things like natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, all these kinds of things.
Wars.
Wars, that's exactly right. And things like pandemics
Yep.
that literally control or help to keep population in check. And you think, well, that's terrible, but that's just one of the products of Mother Nature along with human beings on the planet. So not that COVID was intended to be a check on population, but whether it was for real, whether it was said, or whether it's a natural event, it is really taking, putting a check on population.
Ever since human beings learned how to count, there have been more human beings born than have died.
Yeah, you're right.
But that number is getting closer.
That's right. I read that, I think, about a year ago when I was looking up the deaths due to flu, for example, versus the pandemic, and all that sort of thing, because we were talking. And I remember reading about that, about the growth and the death rate, and how the growth rate was slowing. And it's slowing in the United States, I think, because of Planned Parenthood,
Yeah.
for example. And I think in China, you were there, doesn't the Chinese government control or encourage controlling children being born to parents you're allotted one maybe or two or something like that?
One tax-free.
Okay. Oh, maybe.
They use
okay.
taxes
Okay.
to,
Okay.
you can't have more than one child.
Oh.
And farmers are urged to have more than one
Okay,
child.
sure, help out on the farm.
But if you're not a farmer, then your taxes go up dramatically if you have a second child.
Wow, okay, well,
So,
taxes.
I
that
guess
sounds
maybe
like-
it's the same thing here.
I was gonna say, it sounds like the United States to me. Ronnie, you got any birthdays this morning?
We do have a couple birthdays.
Let's have them.
Happy birthday to Gracie Mays. Shondell Robertson, happy birthday to you. I had a call a little while ago for that one. Thanks for listening. And it looks like Joni Dalton.
It may be Joni Dalton.
Joni Dalton. Happy birthday to you, Joni.
All right, and I have 2 or 3 here, and I think these names people will remember. On this day in 1741, Benedict Arnold was
Yeah.
born. You know, and that's always a phrase you use when you talk about a traitor, you know, or something like that. But
You never
he
hear
was-
anything nice about Benedict Arnold.
I know it, and yet he was a patriot, you know, back in the
Yeah.
Revolutionary War days. And anyway,
And he simply bet on the wrong side.
that's right. And so he was considered to be a patriot. Anyway, I mean,
traitor, yeah.
Yeah, traitor. On this day in 1906,
Can you name another traitor?
Let's see. The guy that's with the computer stuff that's over Assange, would he be a traitor?
Yeah, I guess he would be.
Who
Yeah.
are you thinking about?
I can't right now. I can't think of
you
another.
ask me. You don't ever ask a question if you don't have the answer. That's what lawyers tell you.
Oh, yeah.
Don't ever do that. But anyway, and then 1906, William Bendix. Now, do you remember him? The Life of Riley.
Yeah, I remember the actor.
The
Yes.
TV series, The Life of Riley, and he was the star. And I remember seeing him as a kid, but before that, he was in various westerns and so forth. So when you see an old western
Thank you so much for
and you see William Bendix
Yeah.
in there, you go, wait a second. That's the Life of Riley guy. He's not supposed to be in a bang bang shoot 'em up. He's
Yeah.
supposed to be laying out on a hammock on his front porch.
And he normally played crooks, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Outside of the Life of
Before
Riley.
he went
yeah.
into the Life of Riley. That's exactly right.
A black and white series.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Andy Rooney. I talk about sounding like Andy Rooney every now and then. Was born on this day in 1919, and then in 1941, an actress, Faye Dunaway, who was probably one of her claims to fame was Bonnie and Clyde. She was in there with Warren Beatty.
80.
Do it.
Johnny Lou Dalton. We
Oh.
need to correct that
All right.
that birthday.
Well,
It's
thank
Johnny
you.
Lou
And
Dalton.
thank you for calling in and
Do you-
correcting that.
Do you get? I read my AARP magazine yesterday,
mhm. I
and
read
that's
it.
how I knew about Faye Dunaway being 80
Oh, yeah.
years of age.
Yeah.
And on the back page, you always go through who's 60, who's 70, who's
Right,
80, and who's
right,
90.
right.
And Faye Dunaway was in the 80 slot
Well,
yesterday.
It makes sense. I'm in the 70s slot.
Well-
She's not a whole lot ahead of me. Talking about Benedict Arnold, on this day in 1784, the United States signed a peace treaty with Great Britain, ending the Revolutionary War. And I've been reading a book about patriots and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, that thing went on forever, you know? And,
It went on for its longest war.
it went on forever, and they're, the British are camped in New York City, and they're here and
Yeah.
there, and everybody just goes along with their daily work, but they
It's-
keep fighting. It's the strangest thing.
I misspoke. The revolution is not as long as the war that we are in now.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
Okay, yeah, well, we can't count that one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is a war.
Yeah.
And then Alexander Graham Bell demonstrated the telephone to Queen Victoria
Wow.
on this day, and I believe, because I've read this before, I think, and I'm not trying to be funny, I think once she saw the telephone, after he she had telephones installed in the palace.
At Buckingham,
all over,
yeah.
all over Buckingham Palace, which makes sense, I guess. And then I thought this was unusual. On this day in 1943, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the first president while in office to fly in an airplane.
And what was the name of that plane? The Sacred Cow?
I don't know.
But it was the first Air Force One, I guess.
Well, and he flew from Miami to Morocco to discuss the war,
Yeah.
World War II, of course. That's a long way to fly, too, back in those days for a plane. All the way across
For
the
a
ocean.
president of the United
I know
States
it,
to
I know it.
go over that amount of water.
Isn't that true? And on this day in 1952, the NBC show Today premiered. Of course, they're still running. I don't know whether anybody watches them or not.
Have you ever gone to the outside the window there at the
You know, I have been by there. I did not
Rockefeller
stop.
Center?
I didn't
Yeah.
stop, but I have walked down through there that time of day, and people are everywhere down there. Yeah, and I know right where it is. You're right. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio were married on this day in 1954, and in 1954, the Hudson Automobile Company merged with Nash Kelvinator. Now, I thought Kelvinators were
made refrigerators.
but apparently Nash, I guess, made a car and a refrigerator. Maybe that's why. I'm not sure if there's a connection there.
Nash became Rambler.
Nash, that's exactly right, because Hudson, once they merged, they became American Motors.
Yeah, AMC.
And that's right. And then, of course, Chrysler eventually bought AMC because all they wanted was the Jeep franchise. And, of course, we know the story behind the Jeep that's still going strong today. This day in 1963, of all the characters, and you remember this guy quite well, George Wallace
Yeah.
was sworn into office as the governor of Alabama. Now, he was a character. You think back to some of the things that he did and some of those people back in those days when they were having all this signing of the document of the 1964, doing away with segregation and bringing in integration, all that stuff. Wallace was a serious guy that was having serious issues with that, you know, and Lester
Maddox.
yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Lester Maddox was, I remember seeing a picture of one of the guys hanging on a wrecker. A wrecker had come to tow a car away that was blocking something, a demonstration or something. And one of those guys, I think it was Lester Maddox, was hanging on the cable on the wrecker to keep the wrecker from picking up the car. I mean, it was crazy stuff going on those days. Those guys were nuts.
George Wallace
Yeah.
carried Tennessee in a presidential election in
Yeah.
I think it was 1972.
Wow, isn't that something? Speaking of 1972, Sanford and Son. That was a funny TV series.
Sure
They
was.
started on this day.
What was his
on
wife's
NBC.
name he called on every now and then?
Oh gosh,
I'm
not
com-
Isabel.
No, I can't remember.
Don't ever ask a question if you don't have the answer. And then, you know, here it is football, into football season, which I kind of am sorry for. But on this day in 1973, the Miami Dolphins won Super Bowl #7. They beat the Washington Redskins, and they became the first NFL team to go undefeated.
And
Miami
here comes the
Dolphins.
answer to who.
Yeah, we'll hope so.
Here comes the correction.
And then a couple more little things here. Elvis Presley was promoted to sergeant on this day in 1960. And then and you ought to remember this particular thing. In 1972, Elvis drew the largest live television show up to that point with his concert from Hawaii. It was called Aloha from Hawaii.
Was that the black leather suit?
No. That was a small concert in a studio. No, he was dressed out in white and so forth. But and one of the guys in our band, the Exotics, played in the band.
Wow.
Elvis took a lot of Nashville musicians, and Terry Williams was a trombone player in the Exotics back in those days, and Terry went out there with another group of Nashville musicians to play in that band.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Okay.
Yeah, that was the name of.
And I can kind of hear
yeah.
him say Elizabeth.
I'm coming,
Anyway,
Elizabeth.
What a funny show. And Garth Brooks, of all people, on this day in 1999 appeared on Sesame Street, and he was singing some song on Sesame.
Singing to Big Bird, if I remember.
Could have been, but
Yeah.
at any rate, so some odds.
Even though I wasn't watching Sesame Street at age 22.
But you know what? I will admit that I really enjoyed watching Sesame Street because I'd turn it on for the kids.
Is it still on?
Yeah, it's still
Yeah.
on. But it was really neat. And there were a lot of things that Sesame Street would have on there, humor and so forth, that children, I don't think, could pick up on. Just funny stuff, little puns and things like that. But anyway, I do want to mention something before I get off the air. Ronnie and I were talking about this earlier this morning. I would have brought a Herald in. We always like to discuss a couple of things going on in the Herald. But the Herald wasn't delivered this morning because the Tennessean wasn't delivered this morning. Now, the Tennessean, if it was my newspaper, I'd be trying to make sure, as bad as my newspaper is, that I would at least get the delivery out.
Yeah.
And this is probably the second time in a couple of weeks that the paper hadn't even gotten there. It used to get there at 5 o'clock in the morning, but whoever the delivery person is has been getting later and later, and it'll get there at 5:45 and maybe 6 o'clock or 6:45. Well, my day is just about done at that time because I'm up and gone, and I kind of use the newspaper as
It's almost lunchtime.
as a habit, I guess. That's right. To look at the headlines, which are old headlines anyway. They are always at least a day behind. Which is still odd. They don't even print it in Nashville, as you know.
Printed in Knoxville.
They print it in Knoxville and have to truck it to Nashville. So,
But the Herald is printed in Franklin.
yeah, I'm talking about the Tennessean, not the Herald. But the Tennessean, like I said, as bad as a newspaper that is, you'd think that they would do everything they could to deliver it at least on time. And I guess they're trying to encourage you really to go online, and I'd rather not go online. I still like to hold the doggone paper and read the comics, and unfortunately
do the crossword.
and read just the tidbits in there, some odds and ends, But it's just really gotten so bad. The Tennessean of old and the Banner, of course, they were strong papers back in the day.
Yeah, they sure were.
Local reporters, local writers. And now, all their people have gone, they've retired or quit, and so they're pulling stories off the AP and all that kind of thing and throwing it all in there. It doesn't really have a lot of relevance to what's going on around Nashville.
I have seen the headlines in today's Tennessean.
Oh, yeah?
The headline in today's Tennessean is impeached twice.
Okay.
Now, that occurred Tuesday.
Okay.
But isn't today Thursday?
I think it is. Well, like I said, if something happens locally or internationally, yes, it's going to be at least a day behind because I bet their deadline has to be 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon for tomorrow's paper.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it's sad to see the Tennessean go the direction that it has over the years. And I advertise in the Tennessean, and I was seriously considering just canceling my contract, even though I've done business with them for a long, long time. I don't want people to get mad at the Tennessean and then having to open it up and see my ad in there. So they get mad at me. So anyway, but and that kind of transitions now into real estate.
Yes.
Real estate is confusing. It's we say it's hot, and it is hot, but the worry that I see, and when we talk about it, is the inventory, the low inventory, and people needing houses. Not only people that are moving in here, but that's another reason that so many apartments are being built and condominiums are being built.
And huge apartment houses.
Yes, they are, and to accommodate people moving in here. And when you go to these big apartment complexes, and the first one that comes to mind is the Dwell out in Cool Springs, it's another city.
Yeah.
I mean, if you hasn't been out through there,
Huge.
Yeah, if you've just driven down McEwen and happened to glance over there and wonder what all those buildings are, drive in there one day and just go from one street to another, and you'll think that you have been transported like Star Trek to another town somewhere on the earth.
On the planet, yeah.
You cannot imagine what's going on out there.
You think you're in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. And so these people continue to move in here, and there aren't houses for them, so they have to go into a condo or something like that, an apartment, until they can find a house. And at the rate of building that's going on here, we'll just never catch up. And so we talk about selling, and ads talk about selling, and realtors talk about selling. Well, that's great, but there's just not much to sell, and it's really amazing, and it seems to be getting worse all the time. And I keep telling people that if they want to move, we sure need to have a plan, because we need to make sure we can find you something. Don't put your house on the market until you are definitely knowing where you're headed once you get this house sold, because it'll sell in a matter of a day. And then another thing that's out there in the real estate world that is dangerous, and that is called an escalation clause. I don't think we've talked about that, but it's, I hate to say it's common, but it is dangerous. And let me explain what the escalation clause does. If you have a house that you're putting on the market today, Tom, and you put it out there for $500,000, well, let's say today you're going to get 4 or 5 contracts for 500, maybe 505, maybe 510, maybe 520, and then one comes flying in there with an escalation clause that says we'll pay, let's say 515, and yet you've got a contract for 520, another one, but we will pay $500 over your top offer. And you have a cap you put in there. You say, well, we won't pay over 530, we'll say. So then you as a seller go, no, wait a minute, I've got an offer here for 525, and this is the top out of all these. But now this other guy says he'll pay 525, 500. Well, that's what the thing says. But when you do that and then go to that person to get them to pay 5, you have to show them the contract that you had for the 525 to make them know they've got to pay another 5.
Yeah.
Well, you hadn't signed the one that was 525. So it's an offer, but you didn't accept it, and you might have a change that needs to go back, a counter or whatever, and you can't negotiate that contract because you're trying to get another 500 from somebody else, and it really turns into a mess. The Tennessee Association of Realtors did have a form for that about a year ago, and they've dropped their form because they realized that it was dangerous. Some people still use that. I got one yesterday, and that's the reason that it brings it to mind, that had an escalation clause in it. And I went to the seller, and I said, you know, here's what we have. And they said that they'd rather not deal with that because it did sound a little suspicious. It's not suspicious, it's just dangerous, because again, you have to have an agreed-to contract for a certain amount in order to trigger that extra amount on the escalation clause. And if you accept one, then it just gets into a whole can of worms. So you have to be really, really careful. It's almost a scheme as far as I'm concerned, but it's legitimate, but it's just dangerous.
Does that make a lawyer necessary, those escalation clauses?
You know, I've talked to a couple of lawyers that do closings and so forth, just to get their take on this escalation clause, and they said what I'm saying right now. I said I'd stay away from it. It's very dangerous. And yet, when you're out there bidding on a house, which it almost turns into every time as a bid, and you're bidding on a house,
Okay.
you don't know how much to bid.
Thank you.
Do you bid another 500? Do you bid 1,000, 5,000 in order to get it? And the answer is nobody really knows unless you're having an auction. So that's why this escalation clause thing comes into play, which makes it sort of an auction, but it's just dangerous.
Well, with computers accelerating everything so fast, it seems like that is basically what you've got is an auction, and you don't know when the auction's over.
Well, what we do when we have multiple offers, though, like I'm talking about, is we inform the other agents that are bringing the offers in, and we say we've received 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it is. So we want you to make your highest and best and get back to us by 6 o'clock today or 10 o'clock tomorrow morning or something. So you give them an opportunity to redo their bid, so to speak. And that's well and good, but then if you have somebody that puts in that escalation clause, that could trump everybody else's bid, but yet you still need to accept one in order to trigger the escalation clause. And it just makes it makes it tough. Just absolutely makes it tough. What we've got? What now? What are you saying, Ronnie?
We've got breaking news.
All right, let's have it.
Loy, your Tennessean, and Harold are now at your house.
They are at the house. That's
They're-
clear. 3 hours late. Do you say better late than never? I
Well,
don't think so. I say it's pitiful.
and we have to take up for our hometown newspaper.
Oh, the Herald. Oh, it's not the Herald.
Yeah,
side.
it's not. No, it's not the Herald's fault.
Derby has nothing to do with
No.
delivery.
No.
That's exactly right.
And so
Well,
from that standpoint, and I did receive a text a few minutes ago from Derby saying the paper's on its way.
yeah, well, that's good. I wonder if they had a wreck on I-40. And again, it's not his fault. It's just pure transportation here. Anyway, this escalation clause, you have to be careful because you have an abundance of misinformation out there today. You have agents that, and everybody has to start. Tom, you started in radio, and you know you've done well. Right? I mean, everybody starts somewhere, and so agents, just like when I started, I was a new agent. I was not a youngster, but I was a new agent, and I didn't have the experience and understanding about real estate that I do 25 years later. And so with all the new folks coming into the market, there's an abundance of not only misinformation but misunderstanding, and it's just due to lack of experience. And you'll learn over time, but you just have to be so careful with this stuff because you're dealing with big products, very expensive, lots of money, and you can get into a hot water mess really, really fast. And then guess what? Here comes a lawsuit, and it can be a nightmare. So just be really careful when you're out there working through buying and selling and contracts, because a contract is a contract. Once you sign something, it's a contract, and it can't be used against you in a court of law.
This is why you need a realtor that you have known for a while, and that has been successful.
It helps. I was working with a gentleman yesterday, and I don't always just do Franklin, I can tell you. People ask me from time to time, and I went to Center Hill yesterday showing property up in DeKalb County. So we can reach out there. We'll talk more about this one next week because this is a situation where, talking about misinformation, this thing up there at Center Hill was a disaster, but we're working through it. But anyway, real estate can be complicated, it can be fun, it can be exciting, and it's all of those things right now, but it can be dangerous. So I'd love to help you get through some of these issues. So if you're thinking about buying or selling, or you just want some information, hopefully I can help you with that. Give me a call, Loy Hardcastle at Bob Parks Realty, 615-790-7400, or stop by our new office behind Landmark Booksellers. We're in the Harper Square building on the first floor. You don't need to climb steps.
Hometown Radio Show coming up right after the news from Renaissance Bank.